Today, I want to teach you that writers angle their evidence to convince their readers that their argument is valid. Writers don't just plop down facts, quotes, and statistics, expecting their evidence to speak for itself. Instead, writers explain how the evidence is significant, showing how that evidence illustrates each point. When you use quotes, stories, or lists in your writing, you need to realize that the stuff rarely makes a point for you all on its own. In fact, the same bit of evidence can often be spun so that it makes opposite points. Let me show you what I mean by going back to a bit from Hijinks Shootout. I'm also going to read some of my notes from that article. Listen to what the article said and think to yourself, how could I use this bit to support one side or the other side of the debate over whether violent role-playing games are good or bad for kids? This time, I'm looking for evidence that supports the argument that these kinds of games might sound bad at first, but that they actually are good for kids. Help me think about that. The judge makes a pie chart of death, the order of killing assignments, which he or she then distributes to squads shortly before opening day. I'm looking for some good massacres early, this year's judge said as the competition began the second week in May. I've arranged at least one boyfriend-girlfriend kill that should be interesting. Now, let me think whether this evidence relates to the question of whether role-playing games are good for kids or not. The first thing I notice is the article doesn't talk about that. I won't be able to find a quote that says the answer. So let me see. Are there things in the article that could be used to support the side of the argument that I've been given, that these games are good for kids? I'm not looking for the perfect line that actually says, and so this shows these games are good for kids. Instead, I'm thinking about whether there's anything going on here that I could spin as evidence that these games are good. I do notice that this whole role that the judge plays, that's a pretty big role for a kid. So watch how I take this evidence and explain it in a way that makes it work for my argument. This evidence shows that role-playing games, including these violent ones like Killer, are good for kids. For example, some kids end up taking on leadership positions with a lot of responsibility in those games, and they show a lot of initiative, like when the judge in this game thought carefully about the order of the killing assignments. So I made the case, didn't I? But listen, if you're thinking that the evidence is just perfect for that side of this argument, I want to point out that I could just as easily have used that same evidence to make the opposite case. Think with me about how to argue the other side. This evidence shows that these violent role-playing games are not good for kids. In particular, they give kids too much power over each other. For example, the judge in this game of Killer sets up the squads and the order of the killings, and that means he sets upperclassmen against lowerclassmen. He sets girlfriends and boyfriends against each other. It's just too much power for one kid to have over his classmate. Well, what do you think? You see what I mean? My point is that when looking for evidence, you don't need to look on and on and on for the exactly perfect line that says just what you want. Instead, take some evidence that is relevant, and that could be spun one way or another, and then think carefully about which way the evidence warrants. Now you'll have a chance to try this work. Let's take a bit of the text, a new bit of evidence, and I want you to choose if you want to use this evidence to make the point that role-playing games are good for kids or to argue the point that they're not good for kids. You can choose. You'll work with the same evidence, though, so it's up to you which side of the case you want to take. Are you ready? Here's your evidence. It's another bit from Hijinks Shootout. I'm going to start reading a few sentences in. In 2007, Jake Propel, a freshman, distinguished himself by ferreting out the itinerary of a field trip that two targets were taking to Tel Aviv. Protel took a car to Newark Airport, found the victims before they passed through security, and dispatched them using 2 bathtub squirt fish. I had to get special permission from the judge for the squirt fish because I didn't want to take my gun anywhere near the LL counter. Protel, now a junior, recalled as he paced Pierrepont Street with 3 water guns shoved inside the pocket of a hoodie. Now, if you're taking position 1, you'll angle this evidence to show that these games are good for kids. If you chose to take position 2, you'll angle it to show that these games are not good for kids. Think about it. You might want to pause the video, take a few minutes to review your notes, and then ask, what part of this can I use? How can I angle this to support my side? If you haven't already taken a minute to rehearse your debate, go ahead and pause the video and practice that now. Writers. I like the fact that when the evidence didn't explicitly exactly support either side, we come up with clever and creative thinking to use it to make our case. This is huge. Don't be tempted just to plot evidence into your argument. Instead, unpack it like you did today. Take the parts that make your case, explain those parts, and angle them to support your position. This should also change how you read and research, because you don't just skim through articles looking for a perfect line that exactly fits your argument. Instead, you look at the material in the article, then pause and think, could that support what I'm thinking? You read in an analytical and creative way. So today, when you go back to the platform, you will be reading some different articles. I want you to read these carefully, analytically, and in a creative way. They tell you about the impact of other violent video games like Call of Duty. I've chosen these sources on purpose because I know that they, like the ones you already read, have a lot to offer. You'll probably only get to read or reread a few today because you'll be doing this sort of deep work as you're reading. As you do this work, as you work with the evidence so that it supports your big ideas, often your big ideas will change. You'll do new thinking. So your work today will be to do this new research and to write a whole new draft, one that advances whatever ideas you end up with after today's research. You'll probably start that new draft toward the end of today's session. So as you're researching today, and whenever you are researching, remember that you're not only looking for evidence for the ideas you already have, you're also looking to develop those ideas. For a few of you, your original claim and the reasons will still be sound, and your new draft will be advancing the same thesis and reasons exactly. In that instance, you should still aim for a full-scale elaboration effort. So you bring in a lot of new research and new thinking. Either way, be aware that by tomorrow, you'll be bringing in a draft that incorporates your most up-to-date thinking and research. And don't forget to refer to your notes as you're doing your work for today. All right, off you go.